Hey everyone, hopefully I have this figured out. We're combining our Zoom meeting with a presentation. So let's go ahead and jump in. Today we're talking about mentoring. I will define it a little bit, talk about some needs around mentoring, and talk about the CES role as far as mentor and mentee relationships. And so as we go through here, I will pull up some information for you guys to follow along. I'm going to share the link for the presentation so that you have access to that. And within each of the categories, you have your references, so you guys can read a little bit more on some of the research that was done in preparation for talking about mentoring. So if we are defining mentoring, we're looking at connections, collaboration, we're looking at relationships. And so mentoring relationships are usually less formal than, say, the supervision relationship, and can have varying purposes and varying focus. So some programs, like our program at Walden, there's a formal mentor program, the doctoral peer mentor program that they've integrated into our Blackboard recently, which is really helpful as an option for us. So within talking about mentoring, we're talking about forming relationships. We're talking about teamwork between professionals who have differing interests and maybe a different focus for doctoral level students, depending on their research and what they're moving towards, and then different academic goals. But it's similar to mentor relationships that we observe within our community as well. A lot of times we see adult mentors for kids and big brothers, big sisters, and we're looking at the same type of relationship within the mentoring for the counseling profession. And so often what we see is we see more experienced professionals connecting with less experienced professionals. And that happens, again, within both the master's level and the doctoral level programs of study. What the research tells us is that mentoring in itself positively affects performance. And so academic performance, professional development, outcomes, student success, motivation, whether it's internal motivation, external motivation, all of these things are positively correlated with program success when mentoring is available and mentoring is actively used. And so if we match these to the level of study, and here's your references, if we match it to our level of study, what we see for master's level students is the mentor-mentee relationship would focus on building some of those core competencies, counseling skills, and preparing the master's level students to go out into the community and assume the role of counselor. When we're looking at master's level, we're also looking at providing master's level students with support to not only graduate and succeed in their program, become a professional counselor, but working towards licensure and mentoring around that focus. And then when we look at doctoral level students, we look at building upon those skills, those competency areas in the master's program, continuing to build on those so that doctoral level students can assume the role of the counselor, educator, and supervisor and internalize those roles through working with other CESs or working with program faculty and working with people in the community to continue professional development. There's a little bit of a difference, though, within the doctoral level because the core competencies are there already. And so it's more of a collegial role, and you're kind of working with someone who's almost an equal or pretty close to being an equal as far as counseling skills and things like that. But mentoring around those differing roles and helping the doctoral students assume those and transition into that role. So if we look at needs around mentoring, so we've talked about what mentoring is, but if we look at the needs around mentoring, there's specific needs that are met through the mentoring process. And so a lot of the research talks about environmental factors within educational programs and how those impact students' learning and student success and students' professional development. And so mentoring supports students when the environment may impact their learning. Within the mentoring relationship, we need to understand the intersectionality of components of identity. And so within that, we go a little bit further and we look at the impact and the relationships related to gender and power and oppression, marginalization, racism, and understand how those intersect and impact learning based on the student's experience. In an online environment, mentoring is extremely helpful, according to most of the research, and it kind of makes sense. These students don't have physical access to their instructors a lot of times, and so the mentoring relationship might be a little bit different. The mentoring relationship might include video calls or setting up online discussions and forums, and maybe weekly email contact. Excuse me for a second. Weekly email contact to check in and see how students are doing and connect with them and collaborate with them. The other component of that might be connecting them with resources within their local area. And so our role as mentors would be to identify those supports and establish those connections so that we can provide our mentees with that information. Other needs related to mentees and the mentor relationship include recognizing the limited amount of professionals of color within programs. And so how do we help students, Black students specifically, according to the research? And I'll pull up the references here and you can read a little bit more about this, but Brown and Grothaus talk about the limited access and the limited amount of Black CSs and Black professionals, and how this can impact a Black student's experience in their program. And so within that, understanding generations of oppression, and we go back to marginalization, we go back to racism, we go back to mistrust, and understanding within the mentoring relationship how to connect with those students and how to help them establish their sense of self and their identity within their program. Recognizing the courage it takes for these students to continue in programs where maybe there isn't a lot of diversity, maybe there aren't a lot of people of color that they can relate to. So varying needs for mentoring. And let's move forward and let's talk a little bit about the CES role and what this looks like. And so I've broken this down into a couple of different categories. And again, I will post this for you guys so that you guys can see it and can review the references. And I'll also post a PowerPoint slide with a little bit more information about each of the domains that I've been talking about, but maybe aren't necessarily identified in the Prezi presentation. So the counselor, educator, and supervisor's role in mentoring. I think one of the biggest roles is recognizing diversity, and this goes back to talking about the needs and meeting the needs of mentees, but recognizing what Baker talks about and calls code switching and the white narrative and pressure to conform within programs. And so helping those students, helping those mentees establish meaningful relationships within their programs, meaningful relationships with faculty. And both of those, what the research tells us, both of those will support their academic success and personal and professional development and help with those connections within the program, within the community, and for, their future career. Another role of the CES would be, as a mentor, being reflective and self-reflecting with mentees and talking about their experiences and and sharing insight about their own professional development and their own participation in the program, and providing some of that feedback so that the mentee can reflect on their experiences and performance and goals. Another role would be providing opportunities for outreach and some of that advocacy as a CES for mentees, but helping mentees find connections in their community and find other professionals who maybe have shared interests and maybe a shared passion. So one of mine is trauma-based services and trauma-based counseling. And so helping mentees connect with others within the community and increasing those opportunities for outreach. So the other piece of this is, as we continue here, we're still talking about the CES role. And so we're gonna, not only are we self-reflecting in that mentor relationship, but we're providing them feedback to help them progress in the program, whether it's master's level, whether it's doctoral level. I brought up the trauma piece. If they're working with individuals with complex trauma, helping them understand and decrease the impact of those difficult cases and those difficult experiences as they develop as a counselor and establish their identity, their professional identity, and helping them identify opportunities for self-care, self-compassion, and understanding how that fits into their academic performance and their professional efforts in the future. One of the other things, so I talked earlier about online learning and the different ways to connect for mentoring with mentees. The CES role for the online piece, again, is those phone calls, it's the emails, online forums. So we have Blackboard for ours, reaching out in a mentor role and engaging them in discussions and mentoring that success and modeling some of that communication for them to connect with others. Maybe it's an openness to explore topics that aren't related to the specific curriculum, topics that the student is interested in, and connecting them with resources, but also providing information based on your experience as a mentor. Again, we're talking about a mentor as a more experienced, possibly further along in the program, possibly graduating, very likely established in the community, the CES community. And so sharing that feedback. Cultural humility. And so I mentioned earlier intersectionality. So we're looking at religion, we're looking at race, we're looking at gender, we're looking at all areas where power, oppression, marginalization, all of these components and factors within their identity are addressed. But it's not even just that. As a mentor, recognizing within yourself your own cultural makeup and being active in continuing education efforts to learn more about others who aren't similar to you. So fully understanding yourself as much as possible, reflecting on that, and being open to learning and open to helping the mentee find ways that they can do the same thing. Finally, the other thing within the CES role I wanted to mention a little bit was different ways for mentoring, different opportunities. And so co-teaching, individual, group, triadic, all those kinds of supervision, support groups, peer support groups, participating in research, maybe it's research support. Your doctoral study chair is mentioned in a lot of the research as a mentor who, we hear a lot of feedback about how difficult the dissertation process is, but establishing some of those connections and as a mentee or mentor, having those continue on afterwards. Peer mentors. And so maybe we have peers who are further along in the CES program mentoring new students or mentoring the master's level students, and looking for assistantships, looking for advocacy efforts in the community through various connections and relationships, and then participating in publication. And so incorporating mentees in publication processes at CES, and supporting some of that professional development in that area. So we have our references for this section as well. Again, guys, I will post this and you guys will have access to all of this. The last thing I wanted to touch on, a lot of the research that I looked at this week in preparing for our discussion today, some of them talked about measurements for mentoring. And this wasn't really specifically something I had thought about, but there's 4. I've listed 4 on here from the research I completed this week. There's probably many more, but these are 4 different ways to measure the effectiveness of mentoring. Kind of that accountability piece. We're talking about being reflective. We're talking about being supportive. And so 4 different scales that can be used where feedback is given about the mentoring relationship. And that can help us improve as CESs in the future when we're mentoring maybe master's level and CES level or doctoral level students. And so here's a resource. I am going to wrap it up with that. And the PowerPoint, I will post the PowerPoint so that you guys have complete access to all of the references for the presentation today. Again, we have our Zoom meeting, we have our Prezi presentation, and I will post links for both of those, and I will post the PowerPoint slideshow. Thanks for visiting today, guys, and listening to me talk a little bit about mentoring. And I look forward to the next presentation. All right, bye.